So we are now joined by three new speakers. So first, Ian McCallum, that you already spoke during the Q&A session, but he is leading a data environmental research group at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, and is leading the effort to develop new and novel data and methods in a granular project. So it's a European project that aims at generating new data sets, tools, and methods to better understand rural areas. So it's a really complementary project to RUSTIK one. So both are really complementary. So thanks for being here with us today. I will continue with Janet Dwyer. Thanks also for being here with us today. She's an experienced policy analyst and expert on rural policies in Europe, but also in the UK. And through her internationally recognized research, she promotes sustainability and resilience in agriculture and rural development. She's now professor of rural policy at the Countryside and Community Research Institute. And in RUSTIK, she is responsible for the implementation of the Living Lab. For short, this is a really short description. So thank you for joining us into this panel. And moving on to another new speaker today, Simone Sasso. Thank you. I see you could join us on time. To shortly present you to the audience, you are an economist and policy analyst at the European Commission's Joint Research Center. You are working in the unit territorial development in the GRC. And so he is responsible for coordinating the GRC work on innovation, but also entrepreneurship in rural areas. So welcome, Simone Sasso. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we also have Marta Carbonés, which I will not present again since you are all now familiar with our face and our expertise. And I will now give the floor to Guillaume Corradino, which will be moderating the panel.
Thank you, Valentine. I think you deserve a bit of a rest now for half an hour. And I found my voice back, so I will do my best to keep the discussion alive for the next half an hour. So we have plenty of questions for our panelists. I will try to keep the questions short in the hope that you can get the answers short as well. I calculated an average of 4 minutes for each question, so no need to go into too much details. Right. So this morning we heard, well, this morning, no, just before the break, it feels already like a long day. Before the break, we heard about different levels of data and how the challenges to integrate them and developing new indicators. So maybe to broaden the horizon here, I would like to start by asking a question to Simone from the GRC. And moving away from the experience of RUSTIK and Granular, I would be curious to ask what the GRC is doing in terms of tools and indicators to improve data availability and usability to support rural development, maybe to complete the picture of what we've already heard. Simone, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, Valentine. Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So yes, indeed, I work at the GRC in the unit that deals with territorial development. We are working on a broad range of indicators for rural areas across different topics, so innovation, demographics, energy, etc. As Valentine said, I'm coordinating the work on innovation and entrepreneurship in rural areas. We always say that rural areas lag behind in terms of innovation and firm creation, etc. But when we actually try to put some numbers to it, we don't have much information, and that's what we are currently working on. So, for instance, we are developing a set of indicators about the distribution of startups across European territories. We're checking how many are present in rural areas, what share do they represent in each country, and then we're going a bit more granular, building indicators for each province, and we are checking, for instance, if the share of these rural startups is matching the share of the rural population. So this gives us an indication of how likely somehow people in rural areas are to start startups and innovative businesses. And what we see, it's for now a mix of expected and unexpected results, a bit surprising results. So we find that indeed in Europe about 6% more or less of the startups are in rural areas overall. When, of course, there are quite some differences across countries and even bigger differences across, regions and also provinces. So if we go at NUTS 3 level, we see that, for instance, quite some areas in France, in Italy, in Spain, etc., in other countries are doing relatively well. A few provinces actually have an even higher percentage of rural startups than a percentage of rural population, so they are doing quite fine. Then we are checking the distribution across sector of these startups. Of course, rural startups are, as we would expect, more present in areas such as agri-food, but also there are some surprising somehow results. For instance, we see that there is a relatively good presence in sectors such as energy, transport, but even high-tech sectors such as robotics or semiconductors, which makes sense because also this kind of sector needs quite some space for experimentation, and sometimes rural areas can offer that. Also, and to continue just on the topic of innovation and entrepreneurship, for the first time we are building, I mean, we already have some preliminary results, we are doing some robustness checks on them, R&D investment, and try to see what are the differences between rural and non-rural region. As a sneak peek, as a preview, we see that the R&D expenditure is around 2.4-2.5% of the GDP in urban areas, sorry. In rural areas, we are talking about 1.6, more or less. But even in this case, there are quite some exceptions. Some rural regions in Germany, in Austria, in Finland, in Estonia, for example, they are performing quite well. So again, it depends a lot on the broader ecosystem they are part of. And to build all these indicators, actually, we are using two big type of data. All these that I just described rely on secondary data that already exists, but that has never been, as analyzed in detail. And then in parallel, we are also developing some new data from scratch. So we will soon be launching some large-scale business survey across rural and non-rural area. The idea indeed is to understand, to capture what's happening in terms of innovation in the different territories, what are the factors driving innovation or, hindering innovation. The first results of this will, if everything goes smoothly, will be available next year. And then just a couple of words, if I can add, on other areas that colleagues are working on beyond innovation. Recently, we published interesting study on projections of demographic and economic trends up to 2040. So exactly matching, let's say, the long-term vision for European rural areas, comparing rural and non-rural region in terms of population change, net migration, age structure, and GDP. Also, this is a work that has just been published a few weeks ago, available on our webpage. Another one that is upcoming, just for you to know, is also another very interesting work on housing and energy efficiency in rural areas. So we are looking at things like the condition of the building stock, the renovation rates that are there, the expenditure, how much the different territories are spending to renovate and make more energy efficient their building, and also there we find quite some interesting results. If I will have time, I can give a sneak peek on this, and then finally there are some indicators in the pipeline on trust, just to match all the the big topic of this content. So we are trying to measure trust in government, both European, national, local, among rural population, and compare it with the trust that urban population have. And I'll stop here because I think I'm already running over time.
Yes, you are so many, but that's very interesting. And I do hope you have colleagues working with you on all of this, because I assume you cannot do it all. I hope you have a big team with you. I already have a follow-up question for you, but I keep it for later so that we have time to circle back after everybody has time to speak. And right now, I would like to move to Yen. And so we've heard from RUSTIK, we've heard from the GRC, and to keep broadening our horizon again, I would like to ask you, what, after hearing all of that, Yen, do you see major differences, or on the contrary, complementarities between the way RUSTIK is approaching the issue of data and the way Granular has been doing it? And in assessing this, what were your main challenges in the data collection and analysis work?
Great, thank you, Guillaume. Yeah, no, a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and happy to represent Granular here. I see several colleagues also on the call, in particular our PI team, Tristan Berchaud and Orly Kirsch. Great. Certainly, I think very much complementary, the work that we're doing in Granular for sure, and we're following obviously very closely the great work that's going on at the JRC and in the RUSTIK project. Very much so. We have this similar living lab approach also. That's quite interesting that both projects really targeted this similar approach, different areas overlapping somewhat, but also different key aspects. I think one of the main areas in terms of data that we've been targeting would be a lot of social media data in particular, and crowdsourcing. So we've been trying to focus on open data, obviously, that thinking also about the long term, the sustainability aspects for, in particular, the living labs, but also just in general, if we want to contribute here to new indicators in the future, that obviously that if they are based on proprietary data or something, then one is going to run into problems down the road. So we have this focus on these types of data. In particular, we've been targeting things like accessibility and mobility. So those are two of the areas that we're focusing on. Tourism is another key aspect of our work, and also land use in rural areas. So we have quite some efforts here on these in these areas, and I think obviously we're focusing also now more and more in the living lab regions, but also really trying to make this effort to scale up to the EU level. So wherever possible, that's not always possible to do, but that's our intention. We're having some success there, in particular with accessibility indicators. So that's been working quite well. As an example, we've been relying on this OpenStreetMap data, which is a very amazing data set to work with. It has some limitations in certain countries. The data, then the availability is less than in others, but overall we've found that to be really beneficial. That's also something that again transfers quite well to the living lab regions. And as the name implies, with Granular, we're also trying to add sort of more spatial resolution, finer detail to a lot of this work. So hence also the reason for trying to work with social media data and these sorts of things, crowdsourcing data as well. So I'll stop there, maybe. Thank you. We don't hear you.
You are muted, Guillaume. We cannot hear you.
You have to guess what I was saying. No, sorry. Before I move on to Marta with my next question, I actually have a question for both of you after what I've heard today on your focus on, of course, available data. So I understand. I think we all understand why it's more useful and practical. But a very naive question for me, for you, Jan, and then Marta directly afterwards. What do you sacrifice? If you focus on open data only, not being a data expert myself, what are we losing? What do you renounce in this process by not looking into maybe data that is more difficult to get or protected or anything? So what kind of indicators can we not have because of this need to focus on available open data? Very briefly.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. We have, I probably had to caveat that my first intervention, but we are, for instance, Facebook data is an interesting example. So that's proprietary data actually, but they have a data for good program. So they actually are releasing some of the data, aggregated data for actually for use. And so that's very interesting. So to ignore that, I think would not be ideal. You gain so in terms of mobility, for instance, we're able to discover some very interesting information out of that data, but you have to keep in mind that at any point that data could stop being available. So there's that risk somehow. So that if you're investing too much effort into such a thing, the sustainability aspect may not be there.
Thank you. Marta, what about you on the same question? Have you found yourself sacrificing?
I would say you need to sacrifice a certain degree of quality and consistency of the data. So I think that maintaining quality standards across the different cases and also making sure the information is useful and it's in a same integrated system, this is not easy at all. So you have to find a balance between technical robustness and flexibility. You have to create a system that is flexible, and the process forces you to be very pragmatic. So to focus on what is actually relevant, what type of data is relevant for your specific case, then accept a certain level of heterogeneity, and also to build a system that can evolve over time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And earlier, before we anticipated the question of data protection as indeed one of the main challenges that you encountered, are there other challenges that you would like to share, maybe from the RUSTIK experience? Still for you, Marta.
Yeah. There have been quite a lot of challenges. I would say that one of the main challenges was to align the different needs and expectations of the living labs and also the different stakeholders. Each living lab is operating in a unique context and has distinct data needs. And when we conducted the analysis of data labs and interests across the different living labs, this become very, very clear. There wasn't a solution for everyone that was the same. Some needed highly granular environmental data, others focused more on, socioeconomic indicators. So we needed to find a way to build a system and to support this experimentation process for everyone without becoming too fragmented. And this was, of course, complex. So our strategy was to prioritize the most pressing shared issues and also to address the areas or topics where the data was clearly lacking.
And I don't forget to unmute. Thank you very much, Marta. I think it's a good transition because then I have a question for you, Janet. We heard before about the living lab approach as, of course, fully integrating the process of data collection and an actual player in the whole process. You have worked in RUSTIK with the living labs. What would you say are really the benefits, going into more details, the benefits of the living lab approach in the data collection and the definition of indicators, and maybe on the opposite side, what could be the limits or the challenges involved with the living lab approach? I assume it's not all great and easy.
No, thank you, Guillaume. I think this is an interesting point because our job was really to facilitate the effective working in the living labs. And living labs are a partnership between a research partner and a practice partner in each of our cases. And they're not only just a partnership between those two groups of actors, but those two groups of actors are themselves connected to other actors. So in our core partners, we would have a research partner that might be geographers or social scientists or people who work a lot on policy. And we might have a practice partner that would be maybe a local government organization or a leader lag or an NGO, just a local actor that wants to achieve change and progress in rural development. And so when the discussion starts with the core partners, they have immediate needs and wishes to fulfill. And then we engage with a wider partnership in order to try and meet those needs. So in many of our living labs, we ended up working also with more technical specialists in terms of the design of the ways of gathering or manipulating or analyzing data. So some app development, some new analytical tools, some new types of primary data collection. And this sort of illustrates the way in which a living lab is, you can't predict at the outset exactly what you're going to get, because these relationships depend very much on the individual characteristics of the partners in those partnerships. But the key thing is to ensure that you're learning, you're co-learning. So from the research side, the researcher can bring new ideas for methods, new ways of thinking about data collection or data manipulation. They can bring in new expertise, and they can also provide a function of reflection for the practice partners on their wishes, their needs, and how those might be addressed, so that it's a kind of like a continuous evaluation through the process of the living lab. And from the other side, I think the practice partners bring a great deal of ground truthing to researchers' understanding of rural development issues and problems. And that in itself is hugely valuable, because it takes you away from the abstract of these big data sets, and it really helps you to engage. And I think this is where, coming back to what Ian was saying about the challenge of working in living labs, it's about, often the needs are very pragmatic, but they're very difficult to deal with in normal data sets, because normal data sets tend to be organized at a higher level of spatial aggregation. They tend to be divided in silos in terms of things like sectors and issues. And yet the issues on the ground for the actors, they're integrating all these things. So they want some high level data, they want some local level data, and everything is interconnected. So, transport links to skills, links to employment, links to quality of life. And these are systemically related. So it can be difficult sometimes to meet their needs with the existing sources of data. And in fact, in RUSTIK, we've done quite a lot of primary data collection, not with the view that that data then itself becomes, and the enabling of local actors is also a very important part of this project and what we're trying to do. So with Alexia's question about, how do we continue this? One thing we hope with the Living Lab is that we continue that dynamic interrelationship, and we enable and empower local actors to be able to think about good ways of using data into the future.
Thank you, Janet. So after RUSTIK, they will keep on living and continuing the process, correct?
We hope so, yes, we hope so.
All right, thank you very much. Jan, I'm getting back to you to ask a bit more about the granular experience with Living Labs. I mean, was the approach and process similar to what we've done in RUSTIK? And if not, what was maybe different or new in your experience dealing with the Living Labs?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I would totally agree with what Janet was saying, and also the points that Marta was making before on the living labs. So we are also, definitely really benefiting from this interaction with the living lab. So they have. They have a completely, they have their work ahead of them. They're generally, they don't have a lot of free time. They're very busy people in general. They know the issues in their regions, as we heard earlier in your presentations. They have a lot of anecdotal evidence. They also have sometimes actually, measurements, and they've conducted very often a lot of surveys and so forth. So they have a lot of knowledge and skills there and so forth. We're definitely interacting with them and learning a lot. I think maybe one thing we're doing, you may also be doing this as well, but now we are starting these cross living lab visits, which I think is really interesting. So it's lab to lab interactions, trying to hook up at least 2 or 3 living labs to all travel to one of the locations where they have shared common interests. So been kind of matchmaking a little bit, colleagues leading this effort in Granular, matchmaking across the living labs for shared interests, and then all working together and sharing this. So not this top down kind of thing, but really across. And I think that looks to be a very effective way to move forward. But we're also benefiting a lot from this interaction with the labs, learning a lot from them. They have a lot of data already, actually. So sometimes it's more of some support with how to maybe do some additional analysis on that and a new way of thinking. And so that's what we're trying to bring to them.
Thank you. So indeed, the same process is happening in RUSTIK, based on the common challenges. Some living labs are working closer together, and maybe at some point we can have living labs from the 2 projects and beyond getting together. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the big question of replication and scalability, I would like to go back to Marta. And Marta, I would like to ask your assessment of how much of your work do you feel will be easily or realistically replicable and scalable?
Yeah, that is the big question. So I would say that from the beginning, we thought about our contribution, having the ideas of replication and scalability in mind. That's why all the documentation, all the tools and processes have been structured to be accessible and also to be adaptable, let's say. The database, for example, is being documented. The process of creating the viewer is also being documented. And we also establish close collaboration with the Rural Observatory to integrate their data sets into our platform and to do the same on the other way around in order to enhance this long-term accessibility and also the potential for a wider uptake. And we will also ensure that the viewer remains online for several years after the formal end of RUSTIK. And I think that the RUSTIK viewer was primarily developed to support the Living Lab, but it was also conceived as a resource for research and policy development. And as Janet was saying before, an important feature of the approach in the Living Labs is that they are the ones that retain the ownership of the results. And in that sense, the data and the tools will continue to be used and maintained beyond the project lifespan. And I would also add that building local capacity has been also a focus. So early in the project, we saw that while all the living labs were prepared for basic data operations, only around half of them had the capacity to perform advanced analysis, so such as GIS, for example. And here is where we thought that replication requires not only having the information or the tools, but also to have the skills to apply them effectively. And this is why throughout the project, we were working to communicate the processes, to provide the trainings, to do some capacity building activities, and to present and give specific resources and tools that can be replicated in other type of works and other type of level analysis. I don't know.
So again, a naive question, can we imagine having a self-assessment tool for other living labs or local authorities to assess what is their capacity to handle this kind of process and data in the future, so that they know what are the gaps that they may have before they engage in a similar process? Is it already planned in your work, or could it be something to be explored?
During this year, we will be working on assessing the tools that we have been developing until this point. We will see if these tools have been useful, also how the data that we have gathered on the European and the local level complement each other. And we will try to see how this can build a base in order for future projects and future research. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marta. And I don't mean to be lazy, but I have exactly the same question for Janet, but from a different point of view. So as we've heard, and as Janet mentioned, the work of the Living Lab in itself is an output of the projects of RUSTIK and Granular. And how much of this work with Living Lab will be or can be replicated and scaled up in terms of methodology to engage with different actors? So beyond the data sets and so on, the Living Lab itself.
I think it's eminently scalable. But having said that, I mean, it can be transferred to many other places. And something that's been really remarkable, I think, through the Living Labs is that we chose 14 very contrasting situations with very different scales, different types of partners. But actually, the nature of the challenges they're facing show remarkable similarities when you deal with the particular transitions. So you look at the climate transition, and there's a lot of climate vulnerability issues at the local level that people are worried about. And I think that both the kind of learning coming out of the Living Labs in respect of better understanding the challenge and then thinking about potential solutions, those would be transferable lessons, I think, that could be shared much more widely. I think in respect of policy, this is an interesting thing, because when you work with different types of actors at the local level, not always local government, but NGOs or associations or commerce, local business groupings, they maybe start off thinking that policy isn't terribly relevant to them. But I think we have a nice process here with an interaction with the policy leads in our project, helping local actors to understand that the limitations that policy presents for them, the challenges, and also potential solutions. I think that's been a very interesting process, seeing how they start off saying, "Oh, we don't interact with policy at all," but by the end they're saying, "Yeah, we're going to change the world because we see lots of ways in which policy could help us better." So I think that's an evidence of the transferability and scalability of some of the work that we've been doing. But I think you also have to ask the actors themselves, and I think they would all tell you different remarkable lessons that they've learned from sharing with other living labs and learning together.
We will totally do that actually in the project, but that's another story. Okay, continuing the question of scalability and replication, I'm going back to you, Simone, with a tricky question. I know it's tricky, and I don't expect a big scoop or a miracle, but can we dream of having in the EU Rural Observatory a way to, on the same map, have the quality of life indicators that has been used in Osona and combine it or cross-check it with the indicators you mentioned before about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you know, to assess really is the territory ripe for innovation and for attractiveness? Can we imagine that? Or what are the obstacles to get there?
I think it's possible. You know, we are positive here, and I think it's indeed possible. And what we see is that, for instance, in another set of topics, so there is a colleague here working on the localization of the SDG and the monitoring at the local level. And when you know we are doing a big exercise collecting data using voluntary local reviews, and we see that different places are developing different indicators that are indeed more and more useful. So, for instance, we see, I don't know, in the Basque Country, in Lombardy, in other regions, they start building indicators on the share of the agricultural land that is used for organic farming, and then more and more regions are constructing this kind of indicator. Of course, we cannot from the JRC create indicator so easily. So unfortunately, differently from I think project like RUSTIK and Granular, precisely the Rural Observatory as a main prerequisite. There should be comparability and consistency across all the European countries, but I think indeed precisely RUSTIK, Granular, and projects of this kind are super useful because they can throw some light on the specific needs that different data needs that the different territories have, and then they can, as Janet was saying, they can do some also reality check of the data that is available, for instance, in the Rural Observatory, data that we are producing, etc., and engage with the community to validate, to interpret better the findings that come out of the statistical tools. So I think there is quite some complementarity in this sense, and some activity, of course, that Jan was mentioning, that Granular is carrying out. Some areas we are as well working on them. So we have a big project with the OECD on measuring access to services. We are also using OpenStreetMap data. We have also other kind of activities where we are also using, let's say, big data coming from platform to map tourism capacity. So, for instance, colleagues have been working on TripAdvisor data and similar web pages to estimate the number of nights spent in hotels, in other kinds of accommodation, etc., etc. But honestly, I think even this work is really super useful if we are running in parallel to build the critical mass of research and to exchange indeed common problems and to try to find them out. What is unique a bit of RUSTIK, Granular, and your project is that you are interacting through the living labs with the local community, so which is very useful both to design indicators, so to propose them and to put them on the table, and then little by little, of course, it takes time. It's not magic. It doesn't happen overnight, but little by little, eventually understand which one could be scalable, and little by little at the national level and then beyond. and at the same time also validate and interpret the findings of indicators that we already have at the European level and compare them.
Thank you very much. That was a very good answer. And I guess anyway, all the work that you're doing could be very variable in the living labs themselves to complete the data sets that they are working on themselves. We are right on time. So my first question then is to the panelists, whether any of the panelists has a question for another panelist that maybe I should have asked and I did not do it. Any taker for a question to the other panelists? Otherwise, I open the questions to everyone. If anyone has one question, let's do that. I don't see any question in the chat. Does anyone want to take the floor and ask a question live? There is no hand raised. Okay, well, in the meantime, then I can continue on my thought and maybe get back to Marta and Jan and Janet also, and ask to what degree they are, if anything, making use of the EU Rural Observatory. And then I get back to you, Alexia. I see your hand. So Jan, do you want to go first?
Yes, I can. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, no, very much. So we're following that quite closely. Actually, the Rural Observatory have had several interactions, meetings with the colleagues, with Simone and colleagues, and Lewis and others. And yeah, that's kind of yeah. I think for both projects, we're both following that quite closely. It's like a guide somehow, and we're looking at that quite closely and thinking how can we complement that. Just like Simone was saying, so where can we potentially upscale some of this work that we're doing together with the living labs, understanding what their needs are. A bit of this validation component's also really important. So we're now coming to that aspect also within the granular project. So looking how can we add, sort of increase the granularity of some of this data and complement the work that's going on there. So we, as you said, also I think it's important that there's no harm in having several groups coming at a similar topic from different angles. I think that's crucial in research as well. So there will be complementarity and some sort of redundancy, perhaps, but we're keeping a close eye on that because obviously we would also like to address some of the gaps and help us and address some of the needs that from the Commission side and the policy aspect. So stop there quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Marta, do you want to go next?
Yeah, maybe I can complement from the RUSTIK perspective, which is quite similar indeed. So we have also been in conversations in order to build from the work that has already been done. In the Rural Observatory, we are including some of the data layers that were relevant for the RUSTIK project, and we will always inform on any new advance on our side so that it can also be incorporated in the Rural Observatory and both tools complement well.
Thank you, Marta. Janet, anything to add on this?
Just very briefly, I suppose I think it's been important for us to be able to reassure our local partners that when they're generating new data, which would be to some extent private data, that we can have a really interesting relationship in the database with open data, which is publicly available, and then the ability to kind of integrate that with the data that's generated locally through primary data collection methods, which may be more sensitive, because I think that's something that would be really important at the European level to try and make the European facilities and data that's available more directly usable by people, is if they can find a way to integrate it with their local sources. And I think that's something, if we can show how in RUSTIK we've managed to do that, that could be something that would be useful for the European database to consider, because there'll always be cases where local data is needed to complement what's available from the public sources. And I think if we can preserve and respect the need for privacy with some of that data, but enable layering within a common interface, I think that would be really valuable output.
Thank you. Alexia, please go ahead.
Good afternoon to all, and thank you for a very, very interesting webinar. It's good to see after several years that things are really shaping up. And basically, with your last questions, Guillaume, you have a bit that was I was planning to ask, or now I'll make it just a comment. I think when we launched the calls for these two projects, Granular and RUSTIK, we didn't know what the Euro Observatory was going to be. So the idea was to resource the data work as much as possible with actually, I think these two projects have had around 10 times the budget of the Euro Observatory. Yeah, as we travel towards the end of these projects, it's really good to see how we can arrange some form of uptake and yeah, building together something that would stay, let's say. So how much we can capture of what the projects have done. The projects are short term. It's not so easy because we're using different tools, different types of databases, different, et cetera, et cetera. But if we can come together and try to make as much of this sustainable as possible, that would be a really good use of EU money. But congratulations on everything you've done, and on the panel was very dynamic as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for the kind word, Alexia. We still have 3 minutes left, so if anyone has question or any of the panelists want to react on what was said before, Janet, is that a virtual hand or real hands?
That's a real hand, but it's the
That's
same
a good one.
purpose.
It works.
I hope it's okay. I just wanted to point out that obviously we still have time to run with both the projects, and for us at the moment, we're kind of getting our heads around rural proofing and the agenda around rural proofing. And as I was explaining before, often people at the local level, they hear these terms and they think, what on earth is that? That has nothing to do with me. When in fact, in reality, rural proofing is hugely important to a lot of local actors, but they don't really understand the terminology, the process, the principles, and so on. And I'm really hopeful that through this iterative relationship building at the local level, we have now a much better capacity to test this idea of what's it called, distributed approaches to rural proofing. So where you draw on the very local level understanding of why things in rural areas are maybe disadvantaged, or why there are challenges that are not yet recognized at the European level, and how we can enable local actors to inform the processes of rural proofing so that they're more robust. I think if we can do that in our final year, that will be a really important achievement. And although it might sound very, difficult terminology and strange concepts, this is about ensuring that European money and government level money and policies at all levels are really understanding the challenges that are specific to rural or different for rural, and also the unique opportunities that exist in rural. And I think with many of our transition challenges, actually the rural can be leaders rather than lagging in innovation and opportunity going forwards. I liked some of the things Simone was saying earlier about the work he's doing on entrepreneurship and innovation. I think there's a lot of innovation going on in rural areas at the moment, and if we can pick that up, that will be great.
Thank you very much for these words, Janet. I think to close the panel, one last surprise. I would like to ask all the panelists in 30 seconds to tell me if they had to change or do one thing differently in their project. And in the case of Simone, it could be any indicator that you've been working on. Feel free to be creative. What would it be? Starting with you, Simone.
If I'm allowed, I just want to put also on the table just another aspect, and then I reply. I won't skip your question. Following up also on what Alexia was saying, I think one idea that I would like to throw there and on the table is that indeed sometimes not every indicator has to be scalable. So, but it's still very useful it might be very useful, one indicator that has been developed in one living lab to another rural areas. And so it would be very useful to share best practices on how that indicator has been developed. And I'm thinking of something, very hand-on and so on, like some fishes short, where you guys explain what happened in a certain territory, how that indicator has been built. So this, I think it's something, for instance, we are not doing. And probably, I don't know, in the planning, the big planning of RUSTIK and Granular, if this is already, in the pipeline, but perhaps like something like this could be an idea. And going back on the question of Guillaume, well, plenty of things. We lost quite some times on exploring some private databases that supposedly were great, and then we realized that had a lot of missing information. So we sometimes even that was the low-hanging fruit, but sometimes it's even better to explore, things that don't seem so low-hanging, and then sometimes are actually more low-hanging than the low-hanging one. So I won't enter into details, but we have a lot to change.
Thank you, Simone. All right, Jan, want to go next for the concluding words?
Yes,
on
thanks
what
very
you would
much.
change?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing perhaps would be to have the luxury to have traveled immediately and instantly to all of the living labs. So we for some reason we have a very small travel budget in Granular. We focused. It was written, I think, in the somewhat COVID time, so we were influenced by that somewhat. And we started. We were in the French Living Lab and very early on, and that of course has influenced a lot of our thinking around the project. But now, I mean, yeah, of course. Meanwhile, we're everywhere. But I think that would have been, yeah, that's maybe a wish somehow. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Marta, one thing you would do differently?
Still thinking, but
Or we
I
can go
think
to
that
Janet first if you want 10
I can try
seconds
to
more.
answer maybe, and Janet will close better than I. I would say that I would have loved to have more time to actually go down to the indicators and see in each of the different cases if they made sense or how would be the best way to analyze them, because I think that we have been able to